Thank you. As mentioned, my name is Lars. I work for Lego. And what I do is basically trying to sell Lego bricks. So it's all about this little piece. And my talk today is going to be about how this piece of plastic has actually been able to be relevant for the last 85 years, and how I and my teams are using kids as inspiration to actually keep that relevancy. To make this relevant, we tell a lot of stories. So we tell stories about ninjas, we tell stories about Star Wars. We try to create a lot of stories that kids and adults can really tag onto and dive into. But what is even more important are the thousands, if not millions, of stories that are created by users themselves. We see literally thousands of uploads of creations every single day, coming from fans, coming from kids, coming from adults. And that's the important part of Lego. And we can basically say that whenever we produce one video, one piece of content, then the users are creating another 20. And that, of course, is a really important part to listen into and understand where the consumers are. As the guys that just said, we need to be global in Lego. It's a toy, it's a company, it's a brand that has a global relevancy, and that's also why we need to be globally available. So I have a team in US, a team in Shanghai, a team in Singapore, and I live myself in London most of the time when I'm not traveling between those destinations. And the important part here is, like, why do we actually have these bases, and why do we run engagement, and why do we run social media and YouTube and video in all of these markets? That is because this is the pattern of behavior on our platforms from the consumers. So we can basically see that if we look outside work hours, traditional work hours, then 70 to 75% of the time and engagement that people spend on the Lego brand, that is outside our work hours. So we need to stay 24/7 available to make sure that we are on the platforms when our consumers, when our fans are actually available. We want to show up when they're actually listening to us. And we do that on a number of different platforms. All of the social platforms that are relevant, all of the video platforms that we want to be part of, and also on search, which is of course a hugely important part of the consumer journey. I started 6 years ago, basically from scratch, and as also mentioned, we are now very proud to be one of the most digital engaging brands globally, but also one of the brands that are, we are the #1 brand on YouTube, depending on the time of year. Sometimes it's Red Bull, sometimes it's someone else. It depends on summer and winter. Typically, when we go to Christmas, we become the #1 brand again. So the challenge that I had when I started was basically how to rapidly scale the digital and social competencies in a company, while also acknowledging that the area that we're working with in digital is disrupting every single day. And we also just on backstage, we talked about change and the impact that we're seeing every single day in the change of the industry. So basically what we had to do, and what we still are doing, is trying to build a castle, but on plates of ice that are constantly moving around. So we've had 10 years, 12 years of constant growth with Lego. But on top of that, we had to really rapidly scale our digital competencies, our channels, globally. And that takes a lot of effort, and it also takes a different mindset than just having to build things from the ground up and believe that they will remain the same. So instead of trying to be the best at doing social media, like if we 5 years ago was trying to be the best at building tab applications from Facebook, like we would have been rendered obsolete quite soon. Instead, our goal is to be the best company at adapting to, predicting, and creating change in the digital landscape within that remit that is within the brand space that we got. And that is basically what we try to develop. That's the core competency and the muscle that we are trying to flex. So if we look at ourselves, if we look at our colleagues, if we look at other companies, then we can see there are different ways to react to disruption. Some companies and some people, they just try to ignore it, just try to look away. This is not going to impact me. Others, they try to catch up, they try to react to disruption, so whenever they see something new, they just like have this WTF moment and just trying to catch up. We try often, we sometimes are in the other categories, we try to predict. By listening in, we try to predict and embrace change, and when we get very ambitious, we also really try to actually create that change. To do that and to cater for that way of thinking, I think that there are three things that are important to stress here. First of all, it's the mindset. How is a mindset, how's a corporate mindset? And we try to take inspiration from something that is very core to Lego and key to Lego, and that's of course the kids. And one of the challenges with kids' creativity, so kids' imagination, they start around 9 to 12 months. That's when imagination actually starts developing with kids. So before that, kids are just seeing things as they are. If you take a piece, an object out of their line of sight, it basically disappears. But within that 9 to 12 months, they start imagining things. They start thinking about things that are not directly there. But basically what we often see is basically that imagination is just seen as a passing phase of childhood and doesn't really give real competencies. And often with our educational system and the way that we bring people up or bring kids up, we basically believe that imagination has no practical role in how they ultimately perceive the world and create meanings of it. And my point of view is that that's often how companies actually are. We think a lot about, and we spend a lot of time on analyzing the past and predicting the future and doing forecasts and after-action reviews, but we spend very little time on actually exploring, using our imaginations and using the things that we have at hand. So I think the mindset that we need to do in a world that's constantly disrupting is basically to dare to bring our imagination to life, play with the things that we see, and see how ideas actually look like in the real world. So how have we done that on some projects to deal with real business challenges? Because it's always nice to say we need to play around like kids. So one case is, for instance, we've seen a disruption from open social to closed social. So basically coming from Facebook as a traditional sharing platform to basically Messenger. That's a huge challenge when you're in social media. A lot of the methods, a lot of the ways of working that we've basically developed so far has been rendered a bit obsolete. So basically, instead of just analyzing this and forecasting where it will go, we just said, well, one-to-one conversations with consumers on multiple platforms are not scalable. It's not something we can hire 15,000 people to do, so we need to think differently about this. So we played around with bots, we played around with stickers, we played around with GIFs. So just by taking this approach and basically playing around like kids within, of course, like a constrained area of focus, we developed this asset of stickers, try to do it as we would like them to do, try to put them in our own conversations, and then be one of the first brands actually on the Facebook platforms to deploy stickers. 3 weeks of development, just me and designer, some 3D assets, and 118 million downloads within the first 3 months of this being launched. So huge impact just because we do things, we try them out, instead of actually going back to the whole traditional way of thinking. We also deployed the same way of thinking on our own social media network that I will of course recommend you to download. It's the safest social media network in the world, called Lego Life. And we also deployed it in Russia, which, with a few tweaks, created 750,000 downloads in 5 hours. The last challenge was basically to how could we work with GIFs. A very traditional format in some way in digital, but we wanted to bring it to life in a different way. We played around with it together with Giphy, and then created a Giphy platform. So Giphy.com/Lego is only Lego GIFs. They are fueling all of the different chat platforms, and 600 million views since we launched a couple of months ago. So really taking that play mentality into what we do, I think is hugely important if you want to basically solve the challenge of disruption. The second is, how do you actually create your organization and the culture that needs to be catering for that play culture? To me, that's a lot about empowerment. You can't tell people to play, you need to empower them to play. You need to have diversity, and then lastly, you need to be agile. To start with the last thing first, this is basically the model that we use for thinking about staying in touch with the development, with things that are happening right now. It's all about getting that real-time view on things. Then we develop and change our content strategy. Then we change our media strategy. And then we change the whole strategy that we basically have around it. But everything is funded in that kind of real-time way of thinking. We've also changed a lot of our media spend into internal, basically looking at the organic signals before we actually deploy media spend. Much more efficient way of working, but again, based on the same mentality. And then it's also important that we really work with data in a way that is understandable for humans. We don't need a lot of data scientists. We need them to actually develop the data, but we need everyone to be able to understand the data to actually make sense out of it. So this is just a little look into our office, basically making sure that it's available to everyone. And here we have the team working, or parts of the teams working, not just my teams, but a lot of different colleagues from different departments coming together, in this case, executing a campaign in 20 markets. Basically, these people are meant to make the decisions, switch media spend around from hour to hour, approve assets, develop assets, make sure that they are in connection with the audience. And then lastly, I think it's an underestimated part of being resilient to disruption is diversity. If you only hire people that looks like yourself, with the same background, with the same talents, then you will end up risking being blindsided by disruption. So this is how the team in Lego looks like. I think of a 50-people team, we have 35 different nationalities and pretty much the same amount of languages, including Swahili, Bengali, and Danish even. So that is really what is important to us. When it all comes together, a work week looks like this. Monday is a play day, so that is where the ideation takes place. And on the left you see, this is basically how the office looks like. We basically are playing with Lego bricks and building stuff. Tuesday, we shoot the ideas that we did create on Monday, edit Tuesday night, publish to the rest of the world on Wednesday. Based on the signals we're getting from the real-time listening, we re-edit, we take things up, we scale things down, and then we basically localize on Thursdays, crunch the numbers on Fridays, and make all of the material available for the new ideation on Monday. And that's the way to really keep up with the development in social and digital. And finally, we are never the most creative or competent people in the world, in the company. There's a crowd out there that is just much more creative than we are. And to leverage the creative power of the crowd, I think it's important not just to think about how we did it in the TV world. I really don't like campaigns. I think they are meant in for a different time. I know there will still be campaigns as long as we have products that are on shelves and need to be pushed, but it's really not a good way to engage with people if you want their creative ideas, and you would never use a campaign to get kids to play. You basically instead need to create a stage. You need to incentivize, you need to make sure that kids are actually wanting to play, and that's also how to actually leverage the creative power of the crowd. You need to actually create that stage and make it attractive for them to act on that stage. So the first campaign that I did was called, I call it the $100 Project. So basically, it was a project that we did with basically the budget of $100. I asked people to empty their pockets in the meeting room to make them think differently about the budget. We kept the budget at $100 and still kept the ambition of actually taking this budget to a global campaign. So instead of calling our media agency, calling the creative agencies, who would probably not have liked the budget of $100, we instead just said, we're going to use the trends out there. We're going to listen into what we can leverage, and we're going to leverage the creative power of the crowd to make this campaign go global. So we put some constraints on there. We made people think differently, and then we created this stage for this product called George. It was an accessory, so it was like an app and a product that you need to buy both a set and download an app, and the app would ask you challenges, and it was super difficult to explain. So instead, we focused on this guy called George, gave him a backstory, and then basically asked people to make George travel around the world. So we made a small competition, and then asked people to build George with your own bricks, showcase him wherever you want to do, but make him travel the world. 20 minutes later, we saw the first images popping up from Greece. Then he came to Spain. He went to Hollywood. He went to San Francisco. He even went to Hawaii. He went to Australia, and just all of these pictures, just many of 1,000 pictures uploaded from the audience or from the crowd. He went to the Bund in Shanghai. He had been traveling for a while, so he had a haircut at some point. And every time there was posted, there was a story behind it. So a girl brought George to her friend's wedding. Someone saw that and thought that George, he should marry someone. So he got a wife. terrible thing happened. His ex-girlfriend showed up. And as you can see, relationship status, it's complicated. And if you look at the picture, you can actually see that she's pregnant. We had a lot of album covers remakes, so this is Smells Like Teen Spirit, Nirvana album. And this guy won the competition, basically building George, took him on a motorbike and drove him around at a show in Las Vegas. So we made George travel. We created a stage for everyone to basically act on and play around. We gave them some play starters with, this is the concept of play. You can build this character and you can make him travel. And then people start playing, and then they come with their creative ideas, with their imagination, and then it scales. So before this presentation, I just wanted, this is a 6-year-old campaign, but I want to see like if George still was out there. So I searched for George, and I can see that he is still out there. So this is 2 weeks old, this picture from the south tip of Borneo, where George is still traveling around. So just to finish off and to wrap up, so basically the creative power of the crowd is so much greater than our own, and we need to dive into it, we need to leverage it, we need to treasure it the same way as we do it with kids. So to survive disruptions, we need to be the best at adapting to, predicting change around us and around our areas of competencies. And this is the only way that we can keep a relevant brand or a global brand, a long-time brand like Lego, relevant in the future to come. So to do that, we need to think like kids. We need to create an agile culture with focus on diversity and empowerment. And lastly, please leverage the creative power of the crowd. Thank you.